One of the first things that is in the manual talking about technique is stance. And a stance is important in a lot of situations. Any of you that are in athletics know that certain stances are used for different things. If you're in track, you get in a starting stance before you take off running. When I was in high school and played football, there are different stances for different positions. So just like in athletic endeavors, defending yourself involves using a stance. And we call it the combat ready stance. Sometimes it's called an interview stance because police officers use it when they roll up into a situation. They don't know what's going on. They're interviewing people, but they want to protect themselves because, as we know from many incidences over the years, things can go south very quickly when there's a police officer involved. So basically it's a stance that allows you to blade your body so that you're not exposing your entire body to the potential attacker, and it also gets you ready to do anything that is necessary to protect yourself physically. So the stance, if we look at the way I'm standing here, you can see my whole body is exposed. My hands are down. I'm just ready to be hurt. So if somebody comes up to me and I'm standing here with my hands down and my knees locked and just kind of looking at them like I'm scared, this is not going to work well. So the combat stance is 1 foot forward, 1 foot back. The back foot usually is turned out at just a slight angle so that there's no strain on the knees one way or the other. You don't want to turn it all the way out like that, like in a traditional martial arts stance. Just slightly angled. The front foot is more or less pointing forward. I've got my knees flexed just slightly. I'm not bending my knees like this. They're just flexed. They're not locked. One of the reasons I don't want to lock them is because if somebody kicks, there's no place for that knee to go. If I keep it flexed, it can take a little bit. Also, if they're locked, I really can't move. I'm not very mobile. My hands are going to be available. Now, there's two phases. There's the passive stance and the active stance. So the passive stance, my hands are just available. Okay, they're here. Some people like to do this. I can just be having them here like I'm talking to somebody, but I don't have them in my pockets. I don't have them behind my back. I don't have them crossed tightly. If I have to cross them, I'm just crossing them lightly, but my preference is to have them a little bit more ready than cross. But if you do cross them, don't tighten up. And that's kind of a tendency when we're nervous, right? We hunch our shoulders and we tighten up like that. I'm not ready in that situation. So this is the passive stance. The active stance, I might take a little bit more of a step back. I might get a little bit lower and my hands are going up. This is universal sign language for stop, go away, stop right there. It sets a boundary. And what we're doing with this stance is setting a boundary. So from the side, I'm standing here, 1 foot out, 1 foot back. Slightly angled, slightly bent at the knees, and my hands are available in case something goes wrong. A little more active stance, I'm getting maybe a little bit lower. My hands are going up. Okay, now we've talked about zones in the manual, and when we're talking about the zones, it's a concept, and the concept is red always means danger. It also means stop. Yellow means caution, and green means safety or go. In the the war in Iraq, they had something called the green zone, which was the safe zone for American soldiers. So green is safe. So think about a traffic light, same idea. So if I put my hands out like this and turn, that circle that I just made, in general, I don't want anybody inside that circle. If he can touch me, he can hurt me. My arms are pretty long, so I'm kind of a safe bet here. His arms probably aren't going to be as long as mine. But if he can touch me, he can hurt me. So considering that he could also use his legs, which are longer, I may not want him any closer than that. So who are we talking about? We're talking about somebody we don't know who approaches us, somebody who is ignoring boundaries, somebody who is behaving strangely, somebody that we know that is in an altered state. Maybe they're drunk, maybe they've been using drugs, maybe you know somebody who's mentally ill and gets very agitated. So anybody that is a potential threat to us, we want to use that three-color system. Red is in my zone. He can touch me, I can touch him. I don't want him there. So I want to, if at all possible, I want to prevent him from getting in my red zone. Yellow zone, I'm going to be safe. Green zone, I can't really show it here because I don't have enough room. But green zone would be if you're in a parking lot and somebody's all the way on the other side of the parking lot. Maybe they're yelling and they're a threat, but they can't get to you. You know, you can get into the store, or you can get to your car and get out of there. It's also dependent on the context. So if you were on a bus during the day and the bus is full of people, there's somebody sitting right beside you, somebody right in front of you, somebody right behind you, somebody across the aisle from you, there's nothing threatening there, unless of course the person is behaving oddly. But if you're taking the last bus of the night, you're on the bus, and you go and you sit somewhere in the middle of the bus, and there's nobody on that bus except you and the driver. Bus stops, guy gets on, he's a little bit disheveled looking, and instead of just grabbing a seat, he kind of scans, and he looks and he locks eyes with you, and he walks down the aisle, and he sits in the seat right beside you. What's changed? The context has changed. So during the day, those people were close enough to be considered in your red zone, but they weren't in the red zone because the situation warranted people being close. In the evening, it's a whole different story. The context has changed. So the distance that you are safe is dependent upon the context. Okay? I can't emphasize that enough because context change, so you have to be aware of those changes and the kind of distance that you can maintain if school were in session and lots of people milling around campus would be very different than if you were going shopping on Kings Canyon somewhere. Okay, so from the side, this is what the passive stance looks like. This is what the active stance looks like. From here, I can move laterally, I can move this way. From here, I can reach him to do some kind of strike. I can slap down any kind of strike coming, and I'm prepared. So I keep it mellow until he gets too close, and then I do this. And one of the ways I do boundaries is to use my voice. I establish boundaries with my voice. So if somebody's coming up to me, hey buddy, can you give me some directions? I might just say, oh yeah, I'll be glad to, but stop there please. And if he keeps on coming, he's pushing the boundaries. I said stop. Now if he's at that point, if he's really coming toward me and if the situation warrants it, for instance, if you're a woman and you're by yourself and this guy's coming and he's just ignored two direct commands essentially to stop and give you some distance, then you can use your voice. Stop! Or back off! Okay, nice and loud. Now that does a number of things. One of the things using your voice does is it establishes those boundaries, kind of shocks him a little bit, tells him that you're not as easy a target as maybe he thought you were. It forces you to breathe. One of the things that happens is a lot of times people get scared and their adrenaline pumps and they hold their breath. And if you hold your breath, you don't get oxygen to your muscles and you tire out in no time flat. You get exhausted. If you're exhausted, you're vulnerable. Finally, it alerts other people. No, not finally. This is a penultimate, not the ultimate. It alerts other people that there's a problem, which he doesn't want other people involved. And then lastly, it gets your adrenaline going, gets you ready to either fight or get the heck out of there. So, there's our active combat stance. This is more or less the passive combat stance. I used to use this when I worked at Poverello House when I was supervising meals, because a lot of times crazy stuff happened at mealtime. So I was always just kind of there, ready. You know, I was polite to everybody, but I maintained a distance, and I kept this stance because if I needed to jump into action at any point, I was ready to do it. So it's a good stance to practice if you're by yourself waiting for somebody to pick you up or something. Practice using this stance. Anytime you're having to linger anywhere, use this stance. But particularly if you're in a situation that you're unsure about, make sure that you're in this stance. Make sure you're not automatically making yourself a victim by standing there, cowering, or trying to look tough but not feeling tough, and basically being able to be knocked down very easily. Okay, so that's the combat stance. Very simple, but it is a technique, and it's a technique that you ought to practice and use all the time. All right, next video we'll be exploring some more exciting things. See you then.